Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Integrate Professional Development webinar series. The Integrate project aims to promote faculty teaching about the Earth in the context of society. Integrate is an NSF-funded STEM talent expansion project. Its two overarching goals are first, to develop materials and curricula that are adoptable and adaptable for faculty to increase Earth literacy for all undergraduates, and second, to increase majors in the geosciences and related fields to develop a workforce capable of tackling environmental and resource challenges. This webinar is part of a series supporting teaching with Integrate principles, using the piloted and peer-reviewed Integrate developed and curated materials as tools. The webinars this semester emphasize solutions to challenges of interdisciplinary teaching and learning and to interdisciplinary Earth, environmental, and sustainability programs. They are a partnership between the National Association of Geoscience Teachers and the Association for Environmental Studies and Sciences, a professional society for interdisciplinary faculty and students. On the screen and momentarily in the chat box, there will be a link to the webinar event page where you can find the presentation slides, resources related to the presentation, and afterwards, recording of the webinar. If you have questions along the way, you can type them into the chat box. To find that, you'll need to find the Zoom control bar and click on chat. We ask that you leave your microphones muted and video off, as this will help us get a good recording of today's event. At this point, I'll turn it over to David, who will be introducing today's webinar and presenters.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining. I'm David Blockstein, Senior Advisor with the Association for Environmental Studies and Sciences, and also a member of the leadership team of Project Integrate. So as Mitchell said, this is one of our spring webinar series on interdisciplinary education. We have two more webinars, which you'll hear about at the end of the program. But we've got some great presentations, great presenters. This project on core competencies for sustainability education programs is something that has been building on work that I was involved in an earlier incarnation with the Council of Environmental Deans and Directors at the National Council for Science and the Environment. And each of the people here are involved in carrying on that project. And so you can see we have Rod Parnell from Northern Arizona University, a past president of the Council of Environmental Deans and Directors, and also board member of NCSE, Peter Walker, the Dean of the Falk School of Sustainability and the Environment at Chatham University in Pittsburgh, and Peter is a leader in the Council of Environmental Deans and Directors. And then, so they'll be giving the presentation, and then followed by Katja Brundiers, Assistant Research Professor at the School of Sustainability at Arizona State University, who's been doing research that is really connecting sustainability education and disaster recovery and change agents. So some very interesting interdisciplinary work. So I will turn it to you, Peter, to begin the presentation. And thank you all for your time in joining us today.
Thanks very much, David. And hi, everybody. So we'd like to take about 30 to 40 minutes to talk you through this notion of using core competencies to guide the way we put our education together, and essentially to assure quality and that the people coming out of our programs truly can do the jobs that they purport to do. Rod, you're in charge of the slides, so can you move on to the next one? Yeah, you're going to have to do it that way, maybe. So what we want to cover today, we want to talk a little bit about just what core competencies are and why we want to use them, how they relate to sustainability. We say something about the current work in this area that we're doing, some of the ongoing challenges we're facing, and then finally, how you can get involved. So next slide, Rod. Core competencies really came about because people, particularly people working in professions, were looking for ways of defining what was the essence of being that professional. And they wanted to have something which wasn't as constraining as a licensing system, but wasn't as loosey-goosey as just a best practice. So core competency sort of arose in the middle as this way of defining who we are and what we need to be good in our subject. And if you go to the next slide, Rod, you'll see that it really came about in two different ways. We had professionals like doctors, lawyers, nurses, humanitarian aid workers, wishing to define what was the essence of their profession, and therefore how could you be judged whether you were a good or a not so good professional. And at the same time, businesses started to use this methodology to define the key skills they needed in order to be successful in their business. A lot of this came about, if you had to strip stuff away, what would you strip away? Next slide, Rod. Competencies are often seen as being the sort of the intersection of three different things. First of all, the specific knowledge and skills and attitudes that you need to do a job. So typically this will be what will be taught in a very practical course, right? So your ability to handle statistics and apply those statistics. Secondly, going on to that, the ability to apply the knowledge and skills. So you not only know it, but you know how to use that in a situation to solve problems. In other words, you're moving from being just an academic to essentially being a service providing professional. And then finally, and I think critically important in sustainability, the capacity to adapt and be innovative, because that sphere of knowledge and attitudes and application changes as the problems we tackle change. And as some of those little black boxes of knowledge, we start to open them up and we discover how processes work that we didn't previously understand. Next slide, Rob. You can imagine a huge number of competencies. You could almost turn into one of those sort of Chinese menu checklists for any profession, really. What we want to focus on are the things at the very core, the must-have skills and attitudes that are needed to get the business done. Just, you know, if you don't have this, you really can't call yourself a sustainable professional. And if we move on, Rod, at its core, it's not just about being able to define what the competencies are, but you've got to be able to measure them. So you have a competency, you then have performance indicators for that competency, and then measurable outcomes so you know if you've achieved it. And if we can think of sort of examples along this line, for instance, many of us would say a core competency for students is not cheating, right? And a performance measure would be that the exams they hand in have no plagiarism in them. And the measurable outcome is that you apply Turnitin and you can measure that. So you're using Turnitin to measure the core competency of delivering original work. Just a little example. Now for sustainability, it gets a bit more complex. Move on, Rob. Because the subject of sustainability is not a straightforward analytical science. It's not just about being able to acquire and build a body of knowledge and skills. At its heart, it plays great emphasis to a person's relationship to the natural environment. In other words, to that understanding, almost that sense of connection to the environment. Out from that, you then have those analytical skills so you better understand those systems, whether they be natural systems, political systems, business systems that link us all together. And then finally, and sometimes slightly contentiously, most people would hold that sustainability actually posits certain futures that are more desirable in other words, in others. In other words, it's normative. It makes judgment calls and essentially has a set of ethics about how what we do should relate to future generations. And we really need competencies that cut across all of that. Other fields have to do this as well. So if you move on, Rod, nursing, for instance, has come a long way in the last 20 years in defining just what it takes to be a nurse. And I guess just about everybody on this webinar at some time or other has had contact with a nurse or a nurse practitioner. So this is taken from a survey looking at core competencies in nursing across a number of countries. And you see things in there you would expect, number 6, ensuring quality and safety and care. But nurses also up the top there. They've got to understand the ethical and legal implications of their practice. They have to be a good coach of their staff and of you as a patient. They have to be able to manage your entire nursing care, not just the bit they are doing. So you can see the notion of core competencies really trying to get at the heart of what it is that makes you a professional. If we move on to the humanitarian aid business, or delivering aid in conflict and in disasters, again, you can see the complexity, the competency about understanding the context and applying standards in a relief operation, being fixated on achieving results. It's no good just to do, you have to achieve. Developing collaborative relationships, demonstrating leadership, all of these things. So it's not just a straight set of technical skills. For us in sustainability, particularly in academia, next slide, Rob, I think what we're trying to do is to say, at present we tend to use program learning outcomes and syllabus learning outcomes as a way of defining what students are going to get out of their program or their course. And what we're looking at is whether using core competencies as the goal of their learning actually gives you a better chance of building a program that allows them to tackle these very sort of tricky problems, like addressing how do you improve people's health in the face of air pollution, a complex issue. So core competencies, we hope, gives us a better tool than learning outcomes to actually frame where we want to go. And Rob, that really takes us on to sort of your area of, with all of that, you've gone backwards, I think. What does this mean for sustainability and how we apply these in the academy?
Thanks, Peter. What I want to do now is take Peter's overview of competencies and start working down from the general to the more specific, starting with what we can think of as academic competencies at the largest scale in K through 16 education. The idea of what it is that we expect of our students in terms of not just knowledge, but also skills and abilities. And the focus here will primarily be on undergraduate education, but I think it also applies very much toward graduate education and also secondary education, that we can't exactly draw lines between this evolution of a student's knowledge and abilities as they move through our system. So looking at the largest scale, then I think we're all pretty familiar with these kinds of competencies associated with basically any kind of field of study at any kind of level. It's the disciplinary knowledge and the type of reasoning and the types of processes of discovery that really make a difference in terms of what we're trying to do at a more detailed level. For example, at the level of sustainability education in particular. So when we're talking about sustainability education, then it is, or at least we're taking the definition that we could all use in a 2011 review paper to focus on attacking and trying to address real-world sustainability problems, challenges, and opportunities. In other words, it is a very functionally based field of academics where we're looking at what we need to do to identify and address these real-world sustainability challenges. And as we get down into what exactly that means, we'll see that we're building off of these general academic competencies to be able to create a more specific palette of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So as we think about sustainability across the broadest possible scale of education, from elementary through graduate school, we can go to some of the work done by UNESCO and the United Nations in terms of the broad framework for education for sustainable development. And this is obviously a different term than sustainability education or sustainability degree program, in that these are thought to be necessary educational components for all students at all levels. And these principles underlie sustainability, but they are focused in different ways at different levels throughout the educational process. And so these include more of a knowledge base in terms of a way of thinking, more normative competencies in terms of how you are existing with yourself, and then also how you are interacting and solving problems with others. And as you develop these three competencies, presumably these are going to help you develop competence in how to act and how to move forward in problem solving. And as you get more comfortable with learning to act, then you can start to think about transforming yourself and society. In other words, becoming a change agent across society, regardless of whether you are majoring in sustainability or not. So these are the more general kinds of sustainability-oriented competencies that we hope our educational system can provide to everyone. And then we can start to focus more specifically on the goals of a degree in sustainability education. So the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, or SDGs, which you've all heard of, are that assemblage of sustainability challenges that we want to think about all of society trying to address, regardless of what your background or your professional orientation is. Now I want to come down to the goals specifically for sustainability education. And this deals with sustainability problem solving. In other words, as we have talked with people around the world, as we've looked at the literature, what we've seen is that the broad consensus is the key to a sustainability academic program is to help promote and provide sustainability problem solving, which basically has three components to it. One is trying to understand the nature of the sustainability problems and challenges that we have. The second is to try and think about where we might want to end up given the problems or challenges that we have. And then the third is this intervention point. In other words, trying to figure out where, when, and how to act to be able to move us toward the desired future that we want to see with respect to different sustainability visions, or possibly with respect to non-intervention scenarios as well. So these three steps then are going to involve generating different strategies at different scales to allow us to move forward. Just a quick note in terms of how we define, say, knowledge bases versus competencies. We have talked about competencies that are developed through application and study to be able to provide a practical application of knowledge to a particular setting. That knowledge base itself then, whether it's in the natural sciences, social sciences, or humanities, is part of the foundation that we would be using, part of the foundation we would be using to develop these competencies. So as we start thinking about these competencies, we want to start thinking about the different ways that we identify these challenges and then plan to engage with, meet, address these challenges. So we can talk about different kinds of competence with respect to systems thinking for the analysis of a particular socio-ecological issue. We can talk about future thinking in terms of how to explore possible future states. We can talk about the normative aspects that Peter had mentioned before with respect to the values and ethics that we think are necessary to be able to frame the problem. We can think strategically about how to explore different options and the politics, strategies, and management necessary to get things done. And then we can also talk about interpersonal skills with respect to how to most effectively meet with and integrate different perspectives from different kinds of communities and cultures. So these are the main sustainability competencies that were identified in a summary by Week et al. In 2011. And we don't propose this as the be-all, end-all for everything to deal with sustainability competencies, but we feel that it's far and away the best systematic approach to people's understanding and practice of sustainability education. So you can see that there's been tons of downloads. This paper and its competencies approach have guided academic programs across North America. It has tried to be as comprehensive as possible in terms of a synthesis of ideas about competencies and sustainability up to the 2011 date. And since then, and we'll talk about this more, other kinds of competence have arisen in discussion with respect to intrapersonal competence, not just self-care, but also connection to normative competencies, and then also better integration with diverse cultures, and particularly with indigenous cultures. So as we approach this overview of sustainability competencies based upon the Week et al. Model, we can think about 4 basic competences with respect to identifying and planning for a particular sustainability challenge, systems, futures, values, and strategic, which I'd mentioned. Then the interpersonal competence becomes important in terms of being able to work with people from other disciplines, from other cultures and environments, understand these different perspectives, and then be able to put these different perspectives and these different kinds of expertise together to be able to come up with a set of actions that is problem solving to be able to address this issue. And so we can think about these 4 competencies, then building with the interpersonal competence, and then using that to help build your problem-solving competence. But one of the important points to make about this diagram is that it doesn't really show how each one of these competencies has to be developed not just on your own, but with other people. And these competencies are being developed simultaneously as you're approaching the overall goal of solving a particular sustainability challenge. So before I very briefly get into more details about these individual competencies, each one of the following slides then deals with a particular competency like systems thinking that identifies the concepts, the methods that have been identified as ways to address these concepts, and then seminal literature on this particular subject. What is not in each menu are specific learning activities that would be recommended to help to meet these competencies. And as I mentioned before, the reason for that is because we're trying to work these competencies together, and so there's not independent learning activity for one competence versus another competence, but instead you're approaching expertise in these competencies multiply and simultaneously. This is an example that we can come back to that actually talks about integrating learning activities. And so if there's interest, we can get back to that later. So I'm going to run through these very quickly. You'll have plenty of time to look at them in the slide deck itself, but here are concepts, methodologies, and classic literature with respect to systems thinking, competence with respect to futures thinking, normative thinking, strategic thinking, interpersonal competence. And so when we take these individual competencies, we can then map them back onto the original sustainability problem solving flowchart that we had before. And you can see where we would have each one of these skills and abilities play out in terms of thinking about and identifying the problem or challenge, in terms of working on the intervention to be able to figure out where we might want to go in the future with respect to either non-intervention or intervention scenarios. And then applied to these different scenarios would be your normative competence, that is the ethics and the individual personal norms that you would be developing through this application. This is not just kind of one step and then you're done and move on to something else, but instead we're thinking about progressing through a series of sustainability problem solving challenges, activities that go through increasing levels of sophistication. I shouldn't have used the term competence, increasing levels of sophistication as we go from, say, an initial learning phase early in a curriculum or early in a degree program through an intermediate phase, and then finally through the most sophisticated phase, where through these different learning activities, we're drawing upon both science and society in terms of understanding and working with different kinds of cultures and stakeholders, as well as drawing upon the natural and social sciences and the humanities in terms of building teams and framing problems, then looking at developing solutions, and then looking at applying those solutions. So this is a program-long effort to build more and more sophistication into students trying to apply what they've been learning in the degree program. So this is what we're thinking about, and these kinds of approaches, including the Vick et al. Model, have been implemented in other places. And perhaps the clearest example of this has been in Australia, where the Australian Council of Environmental Deans and Directors have put together a tremendous amount of activity in terms of workshops, in terms of invitations, in terms of communications with stakeholders, all to put together their idea of what a broad-based core competency in sustainability education might look like. And you have the website there to go and take a look at this in more detail. But you can see that they focused on the same kinds of things that the Vikidal model has done with respect to norms, with respect to skills and knowledge bases, with respect to systems thinking, with respect to interpersonal competence. And so this has been a very useful, concise, and helpful process that the Australians have gone through and resulted in the re-evolution, the reformation of several sustainability programs in Australia. So it has been used and it has been implemented successfully in some programs in Australia. Now, one of the things that we need to emphasize is that these core competencies can't just exist by themselves. And Peter pointed out before the importance of being able to understand if your students are actually learning what we want to see them learn in these competencies. And so when we think about a competency that we want to have our students master, it's important to be able to figure out what the educational context for that competence is. In other words, it's not enough to say, well, it'd be great if they could learn about being better listeners. Well, without having learning activities that actually can assess how they can improve their ability to be critical listeners, then you haven't really gotten anywhere. So it's important to think about defining the competencies that we identify through these learning activities that we will engage students with. And as we think about this, these learning activities obviously have to come from individual faculty in individual courses, but they have to be pieced together with other faculty, other learning activities to be able to create that ladder that I presented before about increasing sophistication in the development of these core competencies. An important part of that means having students understand what it is that we're asking them to do. That is, it's important for students to understand what the program goals are with respect to these core competencies and how we think students and faculty can together work to get students to achieve these core competencies. So we need to talk about them in the classroom, and we need to define and describe them specifically so students know what their expectations are and what the goals are going to be. So very briefly then, what are we doing? Well, what we're trying to do is pull together a consensus statement from colleges and universities across the country to be able to do a relatively brief, high-level consensus on what key competencies are at the program level. That is, this is not prescriptive, but what we're talking about is thinking about programs as a whole and not individual courses, but something to use as a guide for new and evolving sustainability programs or programs that are touching on sustainability. So what we're doing is working with the National Academy of Sciences, who is doing their own set of workshops, working here as the National Council for Science and the Environment, community of practice on key competencies and sustainability that involves a Delphi research study, and then community engagement in terms of webinars and workshops and meetings at professional societies, including ACE. And finally, another aspect of this that we haven't talked about yet are the importance of agency and community engagement. So Katja is working through the Educating Future Change Agents initiative to look at exactly this issue. How do we get students' attitudes and norms established in sustainability programs. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Peter now to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Actually, we often talk quite glibly about our students being change agents, or that we're essentially training them to be problem solvers. But it's a bit more complex than that. In our minds, normally when we think of a problem and solving it, we think there's the problem, we work out a solution, we apply the solution, the problem is solved. For most complex sustainability issues, though, there isn't a solution. There's a desired end state you may want to drive towards, and even that end state will change as you learn more about a subject matter. So in effect, you're not so much solving a problem as making judgment calls about what direction you go to get towards that desired end state. And if we shift on to the next slide, Dave, Rod, even when you look at statements in the literature at the moment about what the nature of sustainability is, you can see, and I've highlighted here in red, it's full of value judgments. It's about positive change for a better future. Well, who decides what's positive and what's a better future? A healthy ecosystem, how do you make a judgment on that? Positive change, one person's positive change might be another's negative change. And so, in effect, what we're doing is we're applying an ethical code, a set of ethics to our judgment calls. Next slide, Rod. And to be clear, ethics is not really the same thing as the morals. Morals are what we all have individually. It's what drives us. Ethics is a more social thing. It refers to, the, if you like, those rules by which an external source like a code of conduct in workplaces is applied. So ethics are what we agree as a profession are applicable to our work. And next slide, just as we were saying earlier, we can have an ethic defined, for instance, students will not plagiarize their work. That's an ethical statement. We have indicators, percentage of a term essay that's plagiarized, and we have a way of measuring it using Turnitin. So we can see ethics as being part of core competencies and just as easy to systematize as any other competency we have in there. So as you'll see, the work we're trying to tackle is, it's complex and it's broad. It's, in some times, I wish I was back in my original field of environmental science, where I didn't have to worry about the politics and the economics and the sociology and the chaos that comes with trying to predict things far into the future. But those things are the reality if we're really going to solve or start to tackle society's problems. It's a bumpy road. Rod, over to you for how we deal with this bumpy water.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Just very briefly, we want to talk about what comes next. Where are we headed, and how might we think about getting there? And Peter had this great model of two different ways to try and move forward into the future. One is a great big cigarette boat driven by one guy headed to a specific place and powering right through whatever gets in his way. The other would be a more participatory model where we have a number of members, all members of the community, students, faculty, staff, driving the program together and having a cooperative goal to work with the natural ecosystem that is moving downstream with the current to be able to move in the direction that everybody thinks is the best way to go and works with the natural environment in order to do so. So here we see active participation by the entire community. So if that's the way we might want to think about moving into the future, another question is, well, who might be in the boat? And as a former river guide, I've seen what happens when you put an entirely homogeneous group of novice white kids in a raft and expect them to perform. It turns out that successful navigation in whitewater and anything else includes the integration and collaboration and participation of diverse communities to be able to bring in those perspectives. It also involves looking downstream at various scales, temporal and spatial, and also trying to build capacity and outreach in order to better understand the setting in which you're working. So with that idea in mind then, we have a number of ongoing discussions which you can take a look at. You probably have your own, I hope you have your own ideas about additional discussions and directions that we might want to take this consensus statement effort. And I hope that we can hear from you both with respect to chats and also with respect to engagement with the National Council for Science and the Environment, which is a organization that is a institutional organization. That is, institutions join, not so much individuals. And you can find out if you're a member, and hopefully you are or will want to be, and help participate in our community of practice for core competencies. Or if you're not in NCSE and you still have some ideas, we would welcome hearing from you, and our contact information is there. So that wraps up the formal part. David and Katja have been busy keeping up with your chats, and hopefully we have some time for discussion about those comments and questions.
Yes, and maybe as people start thinking about their questions, because there was a very rich presentation. Thank you so much, Peter and Rod. I can maybe just recall for us what we have been experiencing over these 45 minutes. So Peter started out making some very good arguments about why we would adopt a competency-based curriculum development approach. And he gave examples from the nursing and humanitarian aid professions, which are the so-called caring professions. And some people have also identified that sustainability professionals belong to the caring professions, because as sustainability professionals, and I include myself, we care about the well-being of people and planets. And from the argument of a competency-based approach, we then moved to looking at the generic academic competences that are broadly applicable to all academic programs. And then we delved deeper into competences related to education for sustainable development, and then zoomed even further into the key competences in sustainability science, and sustainability science being understood as its own field that has been emerging since the early 2000s. And then Rod identified the competence menu for each of the 5 competencies. And if we think of them together, that's the 6 competencies. And he overlapped it on a generic problem-solving process, because the orientation around successfully solving these wicked problems through transdisciplinary, participatory, long-term collaborations, that is an aspiration that sustainability science programs have, and we hope to capacitate our students to be part of that process. And then maybe just 2 last points I wanted to make. In this sense, the key competencies of sustainability science have obviously been developed for this field of sustainability science and the sustainability profession. However, they are very inclusive. I think sustainability graduates are not the Renaissance person who master all competences. They focus in and specialize on some. But I think what really makes them distinct is that they understand the whole process, and they understand when do we need to bring in what kind of subject matter expertise, specific skills, how can we bring in these people and agencies so that collectively we really can collaborate around a solution that also really delves deeply into some of those tricky normative questions that always are sticky. So yeah, I just want to say, while the key competencies are distinct, they are meant to be inclusive and integrative. And we didn't speak about this too much, but in case questions around pedagogies and assessment. We have been thinking about this as well, and we have also been asking our Delphi study panelists. So if you have questions on this, please also feel free to ask those questions. Now we actually see that a few questions came in. Yeah, and I think that, so one question that came in speaks actually to how do we teach sustainability competences. And something we learned from the Delphi study so far was that people were really very clear that first we need to develop some literacy about competences, key competences in sustainability, specifically with, among students, which obviously also requires competency or the ability among faculty and staff to speak about the key competences as well. And then the other aspect that was brought up in this excellent comment here was the notion of scaffolding. How can we build out the competency development over a 2 or 4 year program? And how can we combine different kind of learning pedagogies that start maybe from the safe environment of the classroom to then branch out into the real world, where students have the ability to employ some of the inter and interpersonal competence to really engage with stakeholders around problem-solving processes.
If I could add something to Katja's comment about scaffolding, I think one of the challenges that we see, whether it's in the community college system or the university system, is a number of our students come in who have already had the opportunity to experience group project learning activities. And in my experience, some of these students are already, oh no, not another group project. And it's important, I think, in structuring these learning activities to have kind of appropriate levels of knowledge that they can apply to a particular problem, and also be able to have them act out different kinds of perspectives. That is, an individual classroom may not be particularly diverse, certainly at a global level. And so there are lots of different kinds of games that students can use in learning activities. Tufts University has created a really nice water resources management game for water management in the Jordan River Basin. And this causes students to be able to assume different kinds of roles and to be able to take that perspective and argue that perspective in the context of these learning activities. So while I agree that there are real challenges to moving, say, a first-year student or a senior in high school in an environmental sciences course into high levels of interpersonal interaction and sophisticated problem solving, I think that there are ways to at least start them moving in these directions to be able to see what might come out at the end farther down the line. But Jennifer's point about scaffolding in terms of working from the basic to the more sophisticated is certainly a very important one. And so that I think needs to help balance our desire to work in a multidisciplinary, multicultural perspective from the very beginning.
Rod, another question for you that came up was a general interest to hear a little bit more the details of each competency, but I think we can share some of the articles that are entailed in the summary article and other ones that were upcoming since then. But maybe can you share some of your research around the interpersonal competence and what you saw is emerging there? And also we should preface it that the Delphi study clearly indicated that the set of 6 competencies are solid and they are not contested, but they also brought to the attention that 2 or 3 more competencies are emerging: the intrapersonal competence, where Rod will speak about, and then what's also called the transgressive competence and an implementation competence. So we see that there is a little bit of movement around the competences, and a couple of studies are in the works that will come out by the end of this or early next year. But Rod, your insights on the interpersonal competence.
Yeah, thanks, Katja. I can talk about that, I think, in the context that Lumare has mentioned with respect to transdisciplinary pedagogy. And one of the things that we've done over the past few years, coming out of a group that started at University of Texas, El Paso, has been something we call the EMBERS model, that is, employing model-based reasoning in socio-environmental synthesis. And this kind of approach can be taken at a variety of different levels, including high school, going through community college and university. Jeff Habron, who's a member of this group at Furman University, has published some good work in terms of looking at increasingly sophisticated learning activities moving through the curriculum. The idea behind EMBERS is the idea of having students work together to better express their own ideas about a particular problem, how they see the problem, what potential solutions might be involved, and presenting that to other people. At the same time, having other people be able to understand what it is that they're saying. And through an iterative process where students are forced to create shared models of their understanding of the system and of potential solutions for a problem in that system, you can document how effective this process has been in terms of pulling together these different perspectives, integrating them, and sharing the kind of learning that they get through this cooperative effort. That I think is one effective way to work on this transdisciplinary pedagogy, and I encourage you to go look at some of Jeff's work there.
Rod, if I can add, Rod, as an extension to that, one of the things we've been doing, particularly with our graduate programs, and we're based on a semi-rural campus, is a lot of it is around problem solving for us, and particularly working in partnership with a local farmer or local business to help find a way for them to get past something they're perceiving as a problem. So for instance, we're working with a local town at the moment that's just lost its last grocery store. So basically it's now become a food desert in the middle of an agricultural area. And in trying to figure out, how to solve that and how to get a food business back there, as Rob said, you have to understand how to model, you have to understand how to take a systems approach. And what we're doing is allowing our students essentially to posit different models and solutions and not trying to get them fixed on a single one initially. In other words, you've got a number of different people iterating different models, working with the town mayor, working with the Chamber of Commerce and the local farmers to look for potential solutions, and constantly trying to keep their minds open and not get fixated on the thing they happen to have found that works today. I think that's one of the hardest things, that we tend to chase after the thing that works, right? Whereas the better solution may not become apparent until we've tried out 4 or 5 things that really haven't been that great. But that business of partnering with real life problems, I've found to be really valuable. I mean, it means you've got to have a pretty trusting relationship. I mean, what the mayor is going to get from us is not the same as he'll get from some expensive consultant. I mean, I think we'd be better, but he might get a more slick answer from the consultant.
And I think it also brings up not only a question of pedagogy and relationship building, as Rod and Peter discussed, it also really brings up an institutional question of how we design our programs and how much credit points we allocate for courses that have a transdisciplinary endeavor. And because if we really would like students to engage with the rich body of methods in transdisciplinary studies and employ them in these relationships to really create solid and trusting relationships and outcomes, I think then often a one semester 3-credit course is not enough. And I have been at the Swiss Institute of Technology, ETH Zurich, and in their environmental science program, they incorporate what they call the transdisciplinary case study. It's a 2-semester project to really allow for sufficient time to frame the problem together with stakeholders, to identify the approach, and then research the issue and spend another third of the time on thinking about how to present and communicate the results and what these results mean to us. So that's in addition to the AMBER project, I think the transdisciplinary case study methodology that came out of ETH Zurich is another example. But again, it brings up the challenge of how much time do we give in our curricula to these kind of stakeholder-based sustainability problem-solving processes. We have a couple of minutes left. I think maybe it's a good time to loop it back to Rod and Peter to kind of help us summarize the gist of today. We will definitely follow up with the literature that people were here asking for as a follow-up that we share with the slides. But Rod and Peter, if I can turn it one more time back to you, that you give us your take-home message.
Okay, I'll give Rod the last word. For me, it sounds trite, but it's a journey. What I'm interested in is using this methodology of core competencies to really get at what we expect out of people who leave our educational institutions claiming to be professionals in the sustainability field, which is such a wide thing. I work a lot with employers who take on our students. And, the first question they ask is, what am I buying? What do I get when I get a sustainability professional? So that's what's driving me. It's a journey, and I hope some of you can join us on that journey. Rod, words of wisdom?
I don't know about that, but thanks, Peter. Yeah, I guess I just want to wrap up with this idea that we are trying to think about what we get out of a sustainability program in terms of the entire student and what that student can do, and not so much as a laundry list of individual skills and knowledge bases that every student should have. That obviously is going to depend upon the resources available to any particular academic institution. So the big picture in terms of what a student can do, how that student acts, and why that student acts, I think are what we're trying to focus on primarily. And as Katja was saying, this means a real trade-off between working on content mastery and then working on learning activities that help build these broader competencies. And as much as it would be great to be able to have a handbook where you can go through the curriculum from one course to another to be able to make this work out, I think that there are going to be a lot of trade-offs that individual academic programs are going to have to make given the expertise that they have within their individual program. We're just trying to provide some kind of general roadmap in terms of where they might want to head in the future with their students.
And I think maybe the last word should be about or of the students. We were speaking about the competencies that we would like to convey to them. And what our experience is here at the School of Sustainability is that having an understanding of the competencies and what students acquire actually gives students a language to explain who they are as an aspiring sustainability scientist or sustainability scholars, whether they speak with their parents, with their friends, with a potential employer, or with any acquaintance they meet in the bus. And so that is maybe another value to really think about the key competencies and how we can talk about them to empower students that they can adopt them as a language to think about who they are and what skills and abilities they bring to the issues of the world.
Oh, thanks, Katja. I think we'll turn it over to Mitchell for the wrap up and go from there. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Rod, Peter, and Katja for the great presentation, and thank you all to everyone who's attended today. I just want to share with you a few more opportunities coming up in the next couple of weeks and months. We have 2 more webinars happening this semester. One is on Monday, teaching nanoscience in the earth and environmental sciences. And the next is in early May, integrating energy, earth, and environmental education. So we invite you to register and join us for one or both of those. Consider your department or course for NAGT's Traveling Workshops program. Our fall workshop application deadline is June 15th. Join us at the 2019 AESS Sustainable Futures Conference. That's happening in late June in Orlando, Florida. Or join us at the 2019 Earth Educators Rendezvous happening in mid-July in Nashville, Tennessee. If you'd like to continue today's conversation, we'd invite you to participate in our online community discussion. I've added a link onto the slide and in the chat box as well. And as always, we appreciate your feedback and ideas. If you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes after this webinar to complete our evaluation, we'd certainly appreciate that. The resources mentioned in today's webinar will be posted to the webinar event page, in addition to a recording and slides from today's presentation. So again, thank you all for attending. Thank you to our presenters. And we hope to see you at a future Integrate event.